The throne room smelled of dying embers and old blood. I stood in the shadows, hands pressed against my sides, trying to stop the soft, forbidding glow that sometimes pulsed beneath my skin. No one should see. No one could ever know. King Alistar sagged on his throne of blackened ironwood. At 28, he looked like a ghost waiting for his own funeral. His armor was dark, heavy, unforgiving, as if it was the only thing holding him together. But even from across the hall, I could see the grayness beneath his skin, the way his breath rattled like stones in a hollow chest. My name is Alara. I am an Omega, unmarked, unwanted. I scrub the floors of the infirmary. I gather herbs for the real healers. I am no one. But when Elder Magnus barked my name across the silent hall, every wolf in the kingdom turned to stare. The great doors slammed shut with a sound like a tomb sealing. Trapped. Slowly, King Alistar lifted his head. His eyes, storm gray and burning with a desperate, fading light, locked onto mine. "Come closer," he said, his voice a shredded whisper. I climbed the stone steps on trembling legs. My secret burned under my ribs, the healing magic I had buried since childhood, the gift that could kill as easily as cure, the power that had taken my mother from me when I was too young to control it. He reached for my hand. His fingers, gloved in leather, were cold. "I am dying," he rasped, each word tearing from his throat. "Marry me. Give me an heir." The court erupted, gasps, growls, protests boiling over like a pot left too long on the fire. My heart hammered against my ribs. He wanted my womb, my Omega fertility, a legacy before death claimed him. He had no idea he had just proposed to the only person in the entire kingdom who could actually save him. They made me wait. The throne room emptied in a storm of silk and snarls. Elders spat protests as guards escorted them out. The last of the courtiers vanished, leaving behind only the echo of their outrage and the heavy scent of fear. Then it was just me and the Alpha King, slumped like a fallen statue upon his throne, and 3 guards who looked like they'd rather face a rogue pack than be alone with an Omega and a dying king. "Leave us," Alistar said. His voice was raw, but the command in it was absolute. The guards bowed and withdrew. The doors shut softly this time. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. I stood at the base of the steps, unsure if I was even allowed to breathe. "Up," he murmured, tipping his chin toward me. "Come closer, Alara." He remembered my name. In all the chaos, that was what struck me as the strangest thing of all. My feet obeyed before my mind could catch up. Each step felt like climbing the ribs of some great, dead beast. Omegas did not climb toward thrones. We knelt below them. We bowed. We vanished. I climbed anyway. Up close, the lines of Cain on his face were carved deep. His hand on the armrest trembled, the fine, constant shake of someone forcing their body to obey through sheer will alone. "How long?" I asked before I could stop myself. His mouth twitched, surprised I had spoken at all. "Months. 3 at most if I leash my power. Less if the council pushes me to use it." "The curse feeds when you command them," I said softly. His eyes sharpened. "You've been listening to court gossip?" I had been listening to the way his life force shrank every time he pulled on his alpha strength. I had felt the invisible rot around his heart pulse like a second, sickly heartbeat. But I couldn't say that. "Gossip travels faster than ravens, Your Majesty." He studied me as if I were a puzzle he hadn't expected to find. "So they think I'm a fool for choosing you. The elders, the nobles, half my own guard. I know what they think of Omegas." "So do I," he said, no softness in his tone, only a weary, brutal honesty. "Which is precisely why I need an Omega." "That makes no sense. You said you want an heir. You could have any high-born female alpha in the kingdom." "And I trigger a blood feud the moment I stopped breathing," he cut in. "Every great house would claim their daughter gives them the right to the throne. They would tear this kingdom apart in the name of tradition." He shifted and the movement cost him. Pain flickered across his face before he smoothed it away. You, he went on, have no powerful bloodline, no alliances, no wolf strong enough to threaten anyone. If I give you my name, my ring, you inherit nothing that belongs to any house but mine. You owe no one. That makes you the safest choice. Safest for everyone but me, I whispered. His gaze drifted past me to the stained glass windows where the last light of day bled into night. If you say no, I die. The council tears itself apart for this chair. Border packs choose sides. Rogues swarm the south. The land burns. Thousands die. He let that ugly, terrifying picture hang between us. You asked for the political reality, he added quietly. That is it. He was right. I had asked, even if the words never left my mouth. I wanted to know why an Omega who scrubbed blood from floors was being asked to stand beside a king counting his remaining heartbeats. And what do I get? The question surprised. The throne room smelled of dying embers and old blood. I stood in the shadows, hands pressed against my sides, trying to stop the soft, forbidding glow that sometimes pulsed beneath my skin. No one should see. No one could ever know. King Alistar sagged on his throne of blackened ironwood. At 28, he looked like a ghost waiting for his own funeral. His armor was dark, heavy, unforgiving, as if it was the only thing holding him together. But even from across the hall, I could see the grayness beneath his skin, the way his breath rattled like stones in a hollow chest. My name is Alara. I am an Omega, unmarked, unwanted. I scrub the floors of the infirmary. I gather herbs for the real healers. I am no one. But when Elder Magnus barked my name across the silent hall, every wolf in the kingdom turned to stare. The great doors slammed shut with a sound like a tomb sealing. Trapped. Slowly, King Alistar lifted his head. His eyes, storm gray and burning with a desperate, fading light, locked onto mine. "Come closer," he said, his voice a shredded whisper. I climbed the stone steps on trembling legs. My secret burned under my ribs, the healing magic I had buried since childhood, the gift that could kill as easily as cure, the power that had taken my mother from me when I was too young to control it. He reached for my hand. His fingers, gloved in leather, were cold. "I am dying," he rasped, each word tearing from his throat. "Marry me. Give me an heir." The court erupted, gasps, growls, protests boiling over like a pot left too long on the fire. My heart hammered against my ribs. He wanted my womb, my Omega fertility, a legacy before death claimed him. He had no idea he had just proposed to the only person in the entire kingdom who could actually save him. They made me wait. The throne room emptied in a storm of silk and snarls. Elders spat protests as guards escorted them out. The last of the courtiers vanished, leaving behind only the echo of their outrage and the heavy scent of fear. Then it was just me and the Alpha King, slumped like a fallen statue upon his throne, and 3 guards who looked like they'd rather face a rogue pack than be alone with an Omega and a dying king. "Leave us," Alistar said. His voice was raw, but the command in it was absolute. The guards bowed and withdrew. The doors shut softly this time. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. I stood at the base of the steps, unsure if I was even allowed to breathe. "Up," he murmured, tipping his chin toward me. "Come closer, Alara." He remembered my name. In all the chaos, that was what struck me as the strangest thing of all. My feet obeyed before my mind could catch up. Each step felt like climbing the ribs of some great, dead beast. Omegas did not climb toward thrones. We knelt below them. We bowed. We vanished. I climbed anyway. Up close, the lines of Cain on his face were carved deep. His hand on the armrest trembled, the fine, constant shake of someone forcing their body to obey through sheer will alone. "How long?" I asked before I could stop myself. His mouth twitched, surprised I had spoken it all. "Months. 3 at most if I leash my power. Less if the council pushes me to use it." "The curse feeds when you command them," I said softly. His eyes sharpened. You've been listening to court gossip? I had been listening to the way his life force shrank every time he pulled on his alpha strength. I had felt the invisible rot around his heart pulse like a second, sickly heartbeat. But I couldn't say that. Gossip travels faster than ravens, Your Majesty. He studied me as if I were a puzzle he hadn't expected to find. So they think I'm a fool for choosing you. The elders, the nobles, half my own guard. I know what they think of Omegas. So do I, he said, no softness in his tone, only a weary, brutal honesty. That will anger the elders more than the marriage, he muttered, but he didn't say no. Very well, they will be under my personal protection. My lungs loosened a little. One more. I want the infirmary. That surprised him. Most prospective queens asked for jewels, estates, a tower. I don't want to rot in a tower, I said bluntly. I want the right to work in the infirmary, not as a scullery Omega, as an assistant. Access to herbs, healer techs. No one forbids me from stepping through that door. He watched me closely now, suspicion threading through his exhaustion. Why? I forced my shoulders to relax. Because if this kingdom is going to bleed for you, someone should know how to stop it. I'd rather be useful than ornamental. It was a half-truth. The real reason hummed under my skin. The infirmary held the only tools, the only knowledge that might help me understand the curse eating him alive. Every herbal, every old scroll was a thread I could pull. Finally, he nodded. You may have the infirmary, but remember, you are queen first. Queen. The word dropped into my stomach like a stone. We sat in silence. The only sounds were the crackle of torches and the distant clang of the changing guard. Up close, I could see the fine sheen of sweat on his brow. The curse clung to him like a second shadow, coiled tight around his heart with every breath. You're not afraid of me, he said suddenly. I'm terrified of you, I admitted, just not the way they are. They fear my power, my crown, my temper. His eyes found mine again. You look at me like a man already halfway in the grave. Maybe that's because you're sitting on your throne like it's a coffin, I said softly. Something sharp flashed in his eyes, hurt, quickly buried. This isn't a love story, Alara, he said, his voice low. I'm not promising you happiness. I'm offering you a bargain. Your life for my heir. Your name for my crown. Your body beside a man who may not live long enough to see his child walk. I swallowed. I know. Then I'll ask you once more. He straightened, drawing himself up despite the terrible strain. Will you marry me? Will you give me an heir? The sensible answer was no. No to the curse, no to the court, no to a crown I never wanted, no to waking each day wondering if the man beside me would still be breathing. But I saw the realm burning in his eyes. I saw my family dragged into a war. I saw my magic rotting inside me, unused, while the only life I might save slipped away. My voice, when it came, was steady. Yes, I said. I'll marry you, Your Majesty. Not for love. Not yet. For survival. For strategy. For the chance to get close enough to the curse killing him and see if a hidden healer could rewrite the fate of a king. The palace awoke the next morning in a silent, furious uproar. Servants rushed through corridors with armfuls of silk. The air smelled of starch, ink, and fear. Everywhere I went, the same words hissed through the halls like a curse. The king is marrying an Omega. By mid-morning, 3 stern-faced maids with sharp eyes and sharper pins dragged me into a gilded chamber I'd never seen. Mirrors surrounded me, reflecting a girl I barely recognized, too pale, too thin, with freckles the elders called common. They stripped my plain gray dress away, their hands efficient and impersonal. I stood there in a linen shift, feeling the cold air on my skin like a judgment. She's too thin, one muttered. Too pale, another sniffed. They tugged my braid loose, combing through my hair with brisk tugs until it fell in a pale curtain down my back. She'll do, the first concluded, if the torches stay low. They spoke as if I weren't there. Perhaps it was easier that way. The woman who entered next made no such pretense. Lady Cordelia wore robes of deep emerald edged in silver. Her black hair was braided into a crown, and power clung to her like a scent, cold, hard, and absolute. I am Lady Cordelia, the Queen's steward, until there is a new queen to command me. The reminder sat heavy between us. Yes, my lady. Her gaze traveled from my bare feet to my tangled hair, cataloging every flaw. You will not embarrass him, she stated, as if this were a fact yet to be proven. The wedding is in 5 days. In that time, you will learn to walk, speak, and breathe like someone worthy to stand at his side. 5 days, my heart sank. That's more than most Omegas get between being chosen and being claimed. Consider yourself fortunate. The lessons began immediately. How to bow without bending too low, how to sit without taking up space, how to keep my gaze lowered without seeming weak, which fork to use, which titles to speak. It was a language of subtle humiliation and impossible precision. Between lessons, nobles drifted in, pretending to browse fabrics while their eyes scraped over me like claws. "That's her," one murmured behind a silk fan. "Look at her wrists, no mark, no bond, barely a wolf at all. He must be sicker than they say." The words slid over me like oil. I'd heard worse in the servant wings. Still, it took effort to keep my hands relaxed, to stop my hidden power flaring in answer to their contempt. I kept my face blank and memorized their voices. By the 3rd day, the gossip had sharpened. Now I had bewitched him. Now I was already carrying his child. Now my mother was his secret lover. Nobody guessed the truth, that he'd chosen me because my insignificance was my only shield. On the 3rd evening, a guard appeared. His Majesty requests the Omega. Lady Cordelia shot me a warning orc. Do not ruin this. King Alistair's private chambers were guarded by 2 stone-faced warriors. When the doors opened, heat and firelight rolled over me, chased by the scents of leather, steel, and something clean and sharp like a storm. He sat by the hearth, not at his desk. The armor was gone, replaced with a simple black shirt. The casualness made him look younger, more human. It also made the sickness more obvious, the hollows beneath his cheekbones deeper, the lines of pain more pronounced. "You look miserable," he said by way of greeting. "So do you," I replied, forgetting the "Your Majesty." One corner of his mouth lifted. "At least you're honest." He gestured to the chair opposite. I sat, spine straight as Lady Cordelia had drilled me. "The palace is in an uproar. The elders petition me every hour to reconsider. The priests claim the moon is inauspicious. What do you think?" "I think the moon doesn't care who I marry," he said dryly, "and the council is more afraid of a crown without a head than a queen without a pedigree." He glanced at my hands, clenched in my lap. "They're teaching you how to hold a fork, and how not to breathe too loudly. Apparently, air is reserved for higher ranks." He huffed a laugh that turned into a cough, his hand flying to his chest. The sound was deep, wet, and wrong. Instinct rose up in me. Before I could think, I reached across the space and closed my hand around his wrist. Heat, then ice, then a slam of pure darkness. The curse reared like a living thing. It wasn't just sickness, it was ancient, sentient fury. In that heartbeat of contact, I saw it. Black thorns, barbed and vicious, wrapped around his heart, squeezing with every pulse. Threads of old blood magic knotted through his wolf, his bone, his crown. My own power reacted, flaring in golden defense against the consuming dark. I ripped my hand back as if burned. Alistair stared at me, eyes wide, pupils blown. "What," he said slowly, "was that?" My heart hammered. The taste of scorched magic was bitter on my tongue. "Static," I lied, my voice thin. "From the fire. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to—" "Don't," he interrupted, and his voice was soft but fierce. "Don't lie to me. Not you." Not you, as if the whole world had been lying to him for so long he couldn't bear it from one more person. "I know when power touches me," he said. I felt it. I could have told him the truth then. You're cursed, and my magic recognizes its enemy. If I try to heal you, it might kill me. Instead, I chose a sliver of honesty. I reached for you, and something reached back. Whatever's inside you doesn't like being disturbed." He flinched, the barest crack in his control. "That much I've gathered. The shamans tried to purge it. One died, one went mad. The last refused to touch me again." No wonder he looked at me with such shock. No healer in their right mind would touch a king with a death sentence woven into his soul. "You should be careful how you use your power," I whispered. "You sound like my physicians." "They're right. Every time you throw your alpha command around, you're feeding it." Silence stretched. Somewhere, a bell tolled the hour. "You presume much, Omega." "My job was to notice when things were dying, Your Majesty. You asked for honesty." His gaze locked on mine, something hot and dangerous moving behind his eyes. For a heartbeat, I thought I'd gone too far. Then he smiled, not a kind expression, but a real one. "I asked for obedience," he corrected softly. "Honesty was a surprise." He stood, the movement slower than it should have been, and crossed to a table where a simple iron dagger lay. He picked it up, weighed it in his hand, and then drew the blade across his own palm in one swift, practiced motion. "Alistair!" His name slipped out, bare and startled. Blood welled, bright and red. He extended his hand toward me. "If you're so certain," he said, "prove it. Touch it. Tell me what you feel." It was a test. The curse pulsed, sensing the open wound. My magic shivered, eager and terrified. I should have refused. I should have bowed and left. Instead, I reached out and closed my fingers gently around his injured hand. Warmth flooded my skin. Then the curse struck. It lunged through the cut like smoke, slamming into my power with a hiss I felt in my teeth. Pain lanced up my arm, sharp, electric, brutal. I bit back a cry and forced my healing magic to flare, just a spark, just enough to knit his skin back together. The flesh under my fingers smoothed and sealed. The cut vanished. The curse did not retreat. It clawed at me, furious at being denied, leaving scorched tracks along my nerves before snapping back into his body. When I finally let go, my whole arm throbbed from shoulder to fingertip. Alistair stared at his unmarked palm, then at me. "You healed that." "Barely," I whispered, "and it hated me for it." He sat back down hard, as if his legs had given out. For the first time, I saw something like hope spark in his eyes, and sheer terror right behind it. "What are you?" he asked. I folded my trembling hands into my lap. "Your future queen," I said, because it was safer than the truth. "If you survive long enough to put a crown on my head." His jaw clenched. "And if I don't?" I said, unable to soften it. "Then you die, and whatever this is will try to take anyone foolish enough to stand between you and it, including me." He looked from his healed hand to the sweat on my brow. "Did it hurt you?" "Yes." "Can you fight it?" My throat tightened. "Maybe, once, twice, I don't know." He leans forward, his eyes dark pools in the firelight. "Try anyway." There it was, the king's ultimatum dressed in different words. "Marry me, give me an heir, fight the thing that killed every healer before you." "I will," I said. What I didn't say, as the ghost of the curse's claws still burned in my veins, was the truth I felt in that contact. Healing him wouldn't be a gentle mending, it would be a war, and every time I touched him, both of us would bleed. The wedding day arrived, draped in suffocating silk and whispered omens. They fastened me into a gown of icy blue, layer by stifling layer. Tiny buttons marched up my spine like a row of teeth. Lace brushed my throat, delicate as a noose. They shoved the bouquet of white roses into my shaking hands. "Breathe through your nose," a maid muttered. "If you faint, they'll call it a bad sign." The great hall was a sea of candlelight and watching eyes. An arch of winter branches and thorns had been woven before the throne. King Alistair waited beneath it, in full ceremonial armor, a crimson cloak on his shoulders. his face a mask of stoic pain. When I reached his side, the hall fell into a silence so deep I could hear my own pulse. "Take his hand," the priest murmured. I hesitated. Alistair's gaze met mine, steady, unreadable. I reached out. The moment our palms touched, my magic surged. It was like plunging my hand into a frozen river shot through with lightning. The curse roared to life, no longer a shadow, but a living, writhing thing. I saw it again, the black thorns, the knotted threads of bloodspell, names whispered in dead languages, all of them meaning die. My knees buckled, the bouquet slipped. For a breathless second, the world tilted, streaks of light and color blurring. Alistair's hand tightened around me, anchoring me. He held me up as I dragged air into my lungs, shoving my power down, down, until it was a dull hum. The curse recoiled, coiling tighter inside him, taking note of me. "You idiot, you just poked a sleeping monster in front of the entire kingdom." "Steady," Alistair murmured, his thumb brushing my wrist. We said our vows. My voice was clear. His was rough. A simple dark band was slid onto my finger, warming instantly against my skin. "By moon and stone, by blood and bone, this union is sealed. Witness your king and queen." The reaction was a ripple of reluctant bows, not cheers. Later, in the quiet of his chambers, the mask fell. He tugged off his armor, piece by piece, until he was just a man, exhausted and in pain. "I hate that hall," he said abruptly. "You hold court there." "That doesn't mean I don't hate it." He rubbed a hand over his face. "Too many ghosts." He looked at me, truly looked, without the crown between us. "You almost fainted." "It wasn't you," I said quietly. "It was what's inside you. The curse. It's old, Alistair. Older than your line. It's not an illness. It's a sentence." He studied me. "You sound like you saw it." I did. The memory of those thorns scraped behind my ribs. When we touched, it woke up, and it doesn't like being challenged. He was silent for a long moment. "You're afraid?" "Yes, of it, and of losing." His shoulders eased slightly, as if my fear, honestly given, was a relief. "When they put the crown on me," he said slowly, "everyone told me never to show fear. Fear was weakness. Weakness was death." He met my eyes. "You looked at me today afraid of losing. There's a difference." I had no answer to that. He reached out, not with command, but with an offering. "Come here." The space between us felt vast, but I walked to him. He lifted a hand, slow enough for me to refuse. I didn't. His calloused fingers brushed my cheek, so careful it made my heart ache. I meant what I said. "This isn't a fair bargain for you. I had no right to ask it, but I asked anyway. And you said yes because the alternative was war." "And now?" I breathed. "Now," his thumb traced my jaw, "I think I chose the only person in this kingdom brave enough, or foolish enough, to walk into a fire for a stranger." His lips brushed my forehead, a chaste, searing promise, not a kiss of passion, but one of pact, a binding of two people standing on the edge of an abyss, deciding to face it together. In the shadow of death, under a roof that had seen too much blood, we shared our first honest touch. It was careful. It burned. And the curse in the dark coiled, waiting. By day, they called me Your Majesty, with voices that dripped poison. The coronation would come later, but the marriage was enough to twist every title into a subtle insult. Elder Magnus, who smelled of bitter herbs and contempt, was the worst. "An Omega on the throne," he'd say just loud enough for me to hear. How modern. I walked the corridors like a ghost in my own life, learning the maps of malice. Who barely tolerated me, Who would tolerate me only if Alistair stayed strong? And who watched me with the hungry calculation of wolves eyeing lame prey? At night, the palace changed. Torches burned lower, echoes faded. My guards, convinced I was asleep, never saw me slip out in a servant's hooded cloak, bare feet silent on the cold stone. The infirmary was my sanctuary. It smelled of rosemary, iron, and hope. I'd spent years here invisible. Now the night attendant, Tamsin, jolted upright when I answered. "Your Majesty." At ease. I couldn't sleep. I just want to read. I drifted to the oldest shelves, to volumes bound in leather stained with something darker than ink. I slid one free, on healing that which should not be healed. The pages crackled. The script spoke of curses that latched onto bloodlines, of magic that fed on alpha command. Every cure has a cost, it warned. The deeper the rot, the more of you it will eat in return. I read until my eyes blurred. When Tamsin looked away, I slipped the book beneath my cloak. Alistair's first true attack came 3 nights later. I woke to the sound of him choking. One moment, his breathing was steady. The next, he was on his side, hand clawing at his chest, eyes wide and seeing. The curse surged through our fragile bond, a black, suffocating pressure. "Alistair!" I rolled toward him, my palm pressing flat over his heart. "Breathe!" He couldn't. His lips were tinged with blue. I didn't think. I let my power flare. Not a spark this time, but a wave. I shoved against the darkness, imagining light forcing its way between the thorns around his heart. The curse snapped back, slicing at my magic with furious barbs. Pain flared along my ribs, but I pushed harder, carving a pocket of air around his lungs. He gasped, a ragged, beautiful sound, and dragged in a breath, then another. When his breathing evened, I slumped back, drenched in sweat, my muscles shaking as if I'd run for miles. He blinked, focus returning. "What did you do?" "I moved it," I panted, "gave you room." He looked at my trembling hands. "At what cost?" "It took a bite. I'm still here." He reached out, his fingers brushing a damp strand of hair from my cheek. The touch was gentle. "Thank you." No title, no armor, 2 words that meant more than any vow. The next day, he was stronger. He ate more, argued louder. The elders muttered about a good night's rest. I knew better. So did he. Each attack after that, I intervened. Each time, the payment grew heavier, a deep exhaustion that settled into my bones, a shaking I hid by folding my hands in my lap. I was carving pieces of myself away to buy him time. I returned to the infirmary books. I read of anchors and bargains, of curses that behaved like jealous lovers, punishing anyone who dared touch their host. The more I intervened, the angrier it would become, the more possessive. The next attack came in his study. He was over maps when his pen clattered from his fingers, his body locking, breath seizing. I was across the room in 3 strides. "Look at me." I grabbed his face, forcing his glazing eyes to mine, my hand pressed to his chest.
Power met power with a sound like cracking ice. The curse slammed into me, furious, trying to claw its way up the connection between us. "No," I snarled in my mind, "you don't get both of us." We were locked in a terrible tug of war inside his body. Then something gave. The curse recoiled. Air rushed back into his lungs. I sagged against the desk, vision tunneling. Alistair's hand closed around my wrist, holding me upright. "Enough," he rasped. "You're hurting yourself." "Better me than you." His grip tightened. "Do not say that, as if your life weighs less." We stared at each other, both panting. The map between us was ruined with ink and sweat. "I feel better when you touch me," he said quietly. "Stronger, like I can breathe." "That's the point." And yet, his thumb brushed my pounding pulse. It's not only that. Heat curled low in my stomach, unwelcome and undeniable. The bond between us, fed by shared danger and whispered trust, had begun to glow with something more. "It's dangerous to mix those things," I whispered. "Magic and other matters. Desire," the word hanging bare between us. "Yes, everything about this is dangerous. You, me, this curse, this court." His touch was a brand on my skin. "Tell me you don't feel it." My heart thundered. "I feel many things, including the fact that if we're not careful, the curse will use whatever binds us to choke us both." His jaw clenched, but he didn't let go. "Then we'll be careful," he murmured, "as careful as one can be standing on a blade's edge." Later, alone, I traced the faint, burning lines the curse had left along my ribs and knew the truth. Every time I reached for him, I was teaching the darkness my shape. Every time his hand found mine, the line between healing and hunger blurred. And sooner or later, the darkness would use that bond against us. The first clue was the silence. My heat should have come with the last full moon, a relentless, undeniable pull. But the moon rose, fat and silver, and my body remained strangely, stubbornly calm. No fever, no ache, just a quiet absence where chaos should have been. I blamed the stress, the curse, the constant drain on my magic. Then Mara, the head cook who'd fed me scraps as a child, cornered me by the ovens. Her eyes, sharp as knives, scanned me. "You're late," she stated. "For what?" "Don't play foolish with me, girl." She dragged me to a storeroom, shoved a chipped mug into my hand, and pointed to a bucket. "We'll know soon enough." My cheeks burned, but my hands shook from nerves, not shame. When I returned, she poured the warm liquid over a handful of dried moonroot and wolfsbane in a clay bowl. We watched. The liquid frothed immediately, a thick, pearly foam surging over the rim. Mara's hand flew to her mouth. "Goddess above," she whispered. "Twins?" "That just means with child," I said weakly. She shook her head, her face pale. "For one, it bubbles, but that," she pointed at the overflowing foam, "that's 2 heartbeats, maybe more." The room spun. 2 heartbeats, 2 lives growing inside a body already bruised from a nightly war. "What do I do?" My voice was a thread. "You tell their father," Mara said firmly, "before the council finds out and tries to turn them into pawns on their board." The news did not stay ours for long. Whispers raced through the stone walls like poison ivy. By the time I reached our chambers, servants were staring, guards were glancing at my stomach and looking away. Alistair was at his desk, ink smudged on his hand. He looked up, his frown melting into concern. "What's wrong? Who hurt you?" "Not hurt. Changed." I crossed the room, took his hand, and pressed it low against my abdomen, where nothing showed yet, but everything had shifted. "Feel that?" His frown furrowed, then his eyes widened, not from a physical touch, but from the bond between us. It rippled, a strange, beautiful echo fluttering through it like twin sets of wings. "Oh," he breathed. The word was full of awe. "Mara tested it. She thinks twins." For a heartbeat, there was no king, no curse, just a man who believed he was dying, now feeling a future pressing small and miraculous against his palm. Wonder, fear, and a sharp, breathtaking joy washed over his face. "Twins," he repeated, voice rough. "The goddess is either blessing us or laughing at us. Maybe both." His hand spread, protective over my stomach. A low, soft growl rumbled in his chest. Pure alpha instinct. "They will not touch you. Any of you. Not the elders, not the rival houses. No one." "I'm more worried about the curse," I admitted. "It won't take me," he said with a ferocity I hadn't heard before. "Not now. We're going to find who did this to me, and we're going to end it. For them." The palace did not share his tenderness. By supper, the council had convened an emergency session. I sat beside Alistair, my chair just lower than his. Elder Magnus offered congratulations that sounded like a threat. An heir is stability. 2 heirs is a complication. 2 pups to fight over a throne. The line is secured, Alistair said, his voice like iron. That is what you wanted. Magnus's eyes flicked to my belly. Stability also requires a healthy king. Working on it, Alistair snapped. Next concern. They were too careful to say the darkest thought aloud. If the king died and I lived, the twins would become the ultimate political weapons. Leverage. Property. That night, Alistair doubled the guard around our chambers, choosing men loyal only to him. We're being hunted, he told me as he removed his armor. The moment they realized you carry the future, someone started planning how to control it. Then we find who cursed you, I said, before they decide to cut their losses and remove us both. Curses, it turned out, left paper trails. In hidden archives, with the help of Lady Cordelia and a few trusted souls, we found them. Old treaties, sealed diaries, prayer logs from priests long dead. The curses described matched Alistair's too perfectly. Bloodline bindings, triggered by the Alpha Mantle, feeding on command. All traced back to one forbidden rite, a ritual that yoked a king's life to the obedience of his council. If he defied them, the curse fed faster. Why would any king agree to this? I asked, horrified. He wouldn't, not knowingly. The pieces aligned with terrible clarity. The ritual had been altered a generation ago, not by a king, by the council itself, during his father's reign, after a brutal succession war. They convinced him it would ensure loyalty, Lady Cordelia said softly. In truth, it chained him to their will, and when he refused to bend, it killed him, Alistair finished, his voice hollow. And then they passed it to me. The curse hadn't begun with Alistair. It began with a desperate council and an elder Magnus willing to turn their sovereign into a puppet on a shortened string. They did this to your father, I whispered, and then to you. Not all of them, Alistair said, but someone in that room did, maybe more than one. Traitors, not from outside, but within the very heart of the kingdom. We never got to decide our next move. The attempt on our lives came in the garden, where assassins love symmetry. It was late afternoon. Gravel crunched under our feet. I smelled the wrongness first. Magic, thin and sour, woven into the breeze. "Stop!" I cried. Alistair halted. The arrow hissed past where his throat had been, thudding into an oak behind him. The shaft glowed with faint, pulsing sigils. I shoved him down. Another arrow whistled overhead. Guards shouted, scrambling. The third arrow grazed his side, slicing through leather. A shallow cut. The curse exploded. It roared through the wound, a vicious spiral. The line is secured, Alistair said, his voice like iron. That is what you wanted. Magnus's eyes flicked to my belly. Stability also requires a healthy king. Working on it, Alistair snapped. Next concern. They were too careful to say the darkest thought aloud. If the king died and I lived, the twins would become the ultimate political weapons. Leverage. Property. That night, Alistair doubled the guard around our chambers, choosing men loyal only to him. We're being hunted, he told me as he removed his armor. The moment they realized you carry the future, someone started planning how to control it. Then we find who cursed you, I said, before they decide to cut their losses and remove us both. Curses, it turned out, left paper trails. In hidden archives, with the help of Lady Cordelia and a few trusted souls, we found them. Old treaties, sealed diaries, prayer logs from priests long dead. The curses described matched Alistair's too perfectly. Bloodline bindings, triggered by the Alpha Mantle, feeding on command. All traced back to one forbidden rite, a ritual that yoked a king's life to the obedience of his council. If he defied them, the curse fed faster. Why would any king agree to this? I asked, horrified. He wouldn't, not knowingly. The pieces aligned with terrible clarity. The ritual had been altered a generation ago, not by a king, by the council itself, during his father's reign, after a brutal succession war. They convinced him it would ensure loyalty, Lady Cordelia said softly. In truth, it chained him to their will, and when he refused to bend, it killed him, Alistair finished, his voice hollow, and then they passed it to me. The curse hadn't begun with Alistair. It began with a desperate council and an elder Magnus willing to turn their sovereign into a puppet on a shortened string. They did this to your father, I whispered, and then to you. Not all of them, Alistair said, but someone in that room did, maybe more than one. Traitors, not from outside, but within the very heart of the kingdom. We never got to decide our next move. The attempt on our lives came in the garden, where assassins love symmetry. It was late afternoon. Gravel crunched under our feet. I smelled the wrongness first. Magic, thin and sour, woven into the breeze. Stop! I cried. Alistair halted. The arrow hissed past where his throat had been, thudding into an oak behind him. The shaft glowed with faint, pulsing sigils. I shoved him down. Another arrow whistled overhead. Guards shouted, scrambling. The third arrow grazed his side, slicing through leather. A shallow cut. The curse exploded. It roared through the wound, a vicious spiral of pain that tore through our bond. Alistair staggered, dropping to his knees, breath gone, eyes glazing. No! I dropped beside him, my hand clamping over the bleeding cut. My magic slammed into the surging darkness, not to heal, but to fight. The arrow's magic was designed to trigger the curse, to finish the job. Not today. I let my control shatter. My magic burst from me in a torrent, pouring into the cut, clashing with the spiraling curse. I saw flashes, a younger Alistair kneeling unawares in a circle of torchlight, a man's voice chanting, Elder Magnus's face, younger, fervent with dark triumph. I memorized it. The curse struck back, a hammer blow to my chest. For a moment, I didn't know who was screaming. Inch by brutal inch, I forced it back from the wound, sealing the poisoned path. My magic flared hot white, then guttered to an ember. I collapsed forward. Alistair's breathing smoothed. The cut was closed. He stared at his unmarked side, then at me, sweat-drenched, shaking, one hand cradling my stomach. You, he rasped. You did that? You've been doing that. There was no point lying, not after what he'd just felt. Yes, I whispered, since our wedding, since I saw what it really was. Anger, horror, and a fierce, aching tenderness warred in his eyes. You've been fighting my death behind my back, alone. I thought if you knew, you'd stop me. And I can't stop, not while you're still breathing, not while they are still growing. He looked from my face to my belly. His hand came to rest over mine. You should be furious. You risked everything without my consent. You asked me to marry you without my fully informed consent. I shot back, exhausted. He huffed a laugh that sounded like a sob. Fair. His fingers tightened. But hear this, Ilara. You don't carry this alone anymore. My curse, these twins, the traitors, we face them together. No more secrets. Together. In the distance, guards reported they'd lost the archer. Of course, the one who wove the curse knew how to stay in the shadows. I leaned into Alistair, letting his steady heartbeat anchor me. Together, then. Inside me, 2 new heartbeats fluttered, fragile and defiant. And somewhere in the council chamber, a traitor realized their arrow had missed, and the hidden healer queen was now their greatest threat. The moon rose red as a fresh wound the night they tried to kill my king in the name of mercy. From our balcony, it painted the palace roofs in rust-colored light. The whole realm felt like it was holding its breath. Wolves howled in the distance, a low, uneasy chorus. Alistair stood beside me, his cloak a dark ripple in the eerie glow. The curse pulsed through our bond, a frantic, heavy drumbeat. It had been growing worse, shorter breaths, longer attacks. My magic was straining, fraying at the edges with each intervention. They're calling it a cleansing, Alistair said, his gaze fixed on the bloody orb. A chance for the goddess to ease my passing and bless the unborn heirs. Comforting, I muttered, if one enjoys being sacrificed in front of an audience. His mouth curved without humor. If we refuse, they'll say we fear the goddess's judgment. If we go, they'll do everything they can to make sure that judgment is final.
His hand brushed mine, a brief grounding touch. Stay close to me. As if I'd do anything else, I said, even as my wolf whined beneath my skin, fur prickling with warning. The ritual circle had been prepared in the inner temple garden, a place of ancient stone and older twisting trees. Torches ringed the clearing, their flames fluttering in the strange red light. Wolves packed the perimeter, a sea of solemn faces and sharp eyes. The air hummed with expectation and something darker, like the pressure before a storm breaks. At the center stood the elders. Most wore masks of pious concern. One did not. Elder Magnus stood by the stone altar, his silver hair braided tight, his ritual robes pristine. An eagerness vibrated from him that made my stomach turn. I knew his face now, not just from council meetings, but from the visions the curse had shown me. Younger, lit by torchlight, chanting over a kneeling king. He was there, I whispered, my throat tight. When they changed the binding. Alistair's jaw clenched. I know. We stepped into the circle together. The crowd fell into a silence so deep it felt like a living thing. Your Majesty, Magnus bowed low, the picture of reverence. Your Grace, his eyes flicked to the gentle swell of my stomach. Thank you for honoring this sacred rite. As if we had a choice, I murmured under my breath. His smile was a thin, cold line. Tonight we ask the goddess to grant our king peace and to shield the heirs he leaves behind from the shadow of his affliction. How generous. My magic stirred uneasily, pressing against the walls I'd built around it. We took our place facing the blood moon. The circle closed behind us with a soft rustle of robes. Magnus raised his hands. Let the rite begin. Chanting rolls around us, low and rhythmic. Elders passed bowls of smoking herbs, bitter sage and wolfsbane, the scent coiling into my lungs. Symbols were drawn on the stones in chalk and ash, lines intersecting in patterns I recognized from the forbidden texts, focusing sigils. But they weren't meant to channel a blessing. They were aiming a weapon. His hand brushed mine, a brief grounding touch. Stay close to me. As if I'd do anything else, I said, even as my wolf whined beneath my skin, fur prickling with warning. The ritual circle had been prepared in the inner temple garden, a place of ancient stone and older twisting trees. Torches ringed the clearing, their flames fluttering in the strange red light. Wolves packed the perimeter, a sea of solemn faces and sharp eyes. The air hummed with expectation and something darker, like the pressure before a storm breaks. At the center stood the elders. Most wore masks of pious concern. One did not. Elder Magnus stood by the stone altar, his silver hair braided tight, his ritual robes pristine. An eagerness vibrated from him that made my stomach turn. I knew his face now, not just from council meetings, but from the visions the curse had shown me. Younger, lit by torchlight, chanting over a kneeling king. He was there, I whispered, my throat tight. When they changed the binding. Alistair's jaw clenched. I know. We stepped into the circle together. The crowd fell into a silence so deep it felt like a living thing. Your Majesty, Magnus bowed low, the picture of reverence. Your Grace, his eyes flicked to the gentle swell of my stomach. Thank you for honoring this sacred rite. As if we had a choice, I murmured under my breath. His smile was a thin, cold line. Tonight we ask the goddess to grant our king peace and to shield the heirs he leaves behind from the shadow of his affliction. How generous. My magic stirred uneasily, pressing against the walls I'd built around it. We took our place facing the blood moon. The circle closed behind us with a soft rustle of robes. Magnus raised his hands. Let the rite begin. Chanting rolls around us, low and rhythmic. Elders passed bowls of smoking herbs, bitter sage and wolfsbane, the scent coiling into my lungs. Symbols were drawn on the stones in chalk and ash, lines intersecting in patterns I recognized from the forbidden texts, focusing sigils. but they weren't meant to channel a blessing. They were aiming a weapon. Alistair's hand tightened in mine. I could feel the tremor beneath his skin. Magnus began the main invocation, his voice rolling with a practiced fervor. "O goddess of blood and bone, see your servant weighed by duty in battle. Take what is owed, leave what is needed." The sigils around us flared with a dull red light. Power scraped over my skin like claws, seeking, measuring. Then it latched on. The weight in Alistair's chest surged, yanking at him like a hooked chain. He grasped, his body jerking as if struck. Our joined hands nearly tore apart. I grabbed his wrist with my free hand, fighting to keep him grounded. His wolf slammed against his cage, snarling in panic. The ritual wasn't asking for peace. It was inviting the curse to finish its work, to rip his wolf out and burn it as an offering, leaving his body an empty, dying shell. The elders' voices rose, a woven net of sound tightening around us. "Stop!" I snapped, my magic flaring despite my hold on it. "You're killing him!" Magnus's gaze cut to me, and for the first time he didn't bother to hide his contempt. "We are fulfilling the goddess's will. Do not interfere, girl." Girl, not queen, not healer, just the omega he thought he could control. Alistair crumpled to his knees, dragging me down with him. His face went bloodless, veins standing out in his neck as he fought for air. Through our bond, all I felt was pressure and burning, as if the curse were wrenching his soul from his body. Enough. Every instinct screamed to stay small, stay hidden, survive. But I looked at my husband on his knees in the dirt, under a sky the color of blood, and realized there was nothing left of that scared girl to protect. I let my shields fall. Magic roared up inside me, no longer careful threads or cautious pushes. It flooded me. The air around us crackled, the torch flames surged, then bowed inward, drawn to our center. Magnus's chant faltered. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "Saving my king." And I stepped forward, pulling Alistair to the very heart of their circle. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Wolf stumbled back as the pressure in the clearing spiked. The sigils on the stones blazed brighter, lines of power flaring under my feet, trying to trap me in their design. Fine, I'd use their own circle against them. I knelt before Alistair and pressed both hands to his chest. The curse hit me like a tidal wave, furious, ravenous. It drove images into my mind, wolves burning, crowns shattering, my own body lying still on cold stone, the twins silent within me. I pushed back. Light, blinding, white gold and hot, slammed out of me. It shot along the ritual lines like water through channels, racing around the circle, igniting every sigil until the entire pattern blazed with my power, not theirs. The elders shouted, some stumbled back. Magnus stood his ground, chanting faster, his voice rolling in desperate fury. Pain tore through me as the curse clawed at my magic, trying to rip it apart. For a moment, I wasn't sure where I ended and it began. I saw Alistair as it saw him, vessel, threat, prize. I saw his father choking on invisible hands in this same garden years ago. I saw Magnus's younger face, lips shaping the same words, drunk on stolen power. There, a thread, a single pulsing line of corruption connecting the curse to its source. In the blinding snarl of energy, I seized it. I followed that rotten line back through Alistair, through the crown, through the twisted old ritual, straight to the man standing before me. Magnus's aura blazed sickly, bound to the curse like a parasite that had learned to live with its host. "This isn't the goddess," I spat, my voice echoing with a power that didn't feel entirely my own. "You don't understand. I understand enough." I twisted. The magic screamed. His hand brushed mine, a brief grounding touch. "Stay close to me." "As if I'd do anything else," I said, even as my wolf whined beneath my skin, fur prickling with warning. The ritual circle had been prepared in the inner temple garden, a place of ancient stone and older twisting trees. Torches ringed the clearing, their flames fluttering in the strange red light.
Wolves packed the perimeter, a sea of solemn faces and sharp eyes. The air hummed with expectation and something darker, like the pressure before a storm breaks. At the center stood the elders. Most wore masks of pious concern. One did not. Elder Magnus stood by the stone altar, his silver hair braided tight, his ritual robes pristine. An eagerness vibrated from him that made my stomach turn. I knew his face now, not just from council meetings, but from the visions the curse had shown me. Younger, lit by torchlight, chanting over a kneeling king. "He was there," I whispered, my throat tight, "when they changed the binding." Alistair's jaw clenched. "I know." We stepped into the circle together. The crowd fell into a silence so deep it felt like a living thing. "Your Majesty," Magnus bowed low, the picture of reverence. "Your Grace," his eyes flicked to the gentle swell of my stomach. "Thank you for honoring this sacred rite." "As if we had a choice," I murmured under my breath. His smile was a thin, cold line. "Tonight we ask the goddess to grant our king peace and to shield the heirs he leaves behind from the shadow of his affliction." How generous. My magic stirred uneasily, pressing against the walls I'd built around it. We took our place facing the blood moon. The circle closed behind us with a soft rustle of robes. Magnus raised his hands. "Let the rite begin." Chanting rose around us, low and rhythmic. Elders passed bowls of smoking herbs, bitter sage and wolfsbane, the scent coiling into my lungs. Symbols were drawn on the stones in chalk and ash, lines intersecting in patterns I recognized from the forbidden texts, focusing sigils. But they weren't meant to channel a blessing. They were aiming a weapon. His hand brushed mine, a brief grounding touch. "Stay close to me." "As if I'd do anything else," I said, even as my wolf whined beneath my skin, fur prickling with warning. The ritual circle had been prepared in the inner temple garden, a place of ancient stone and older twisting trees. Torches ringed the clearing, their flames fluttering in the strange red light. Wolves packed the perimeter, a sea of solemn faces and sharp eyes. The air hummed with expectation and something darker, like the pressure before a storm breaks. At the center stood the elders. Most wore masks of pious concern. One did not. Elder Magnus stood by the stone altar, his silver hair braided tight, his ritual robes pristine. An eagerness vibrated from him that made my stomach turn. I knew his face now, not just from council meetings, but from the visions the curse had shown me. Younger, lit by torchlight, chanting over a kneeling king. "He was there," I whispered, my throat tight, "when they changed the binding." Alistair's jaw clenched. "I know." We stepped into the circle together. The crowd fell into a silence so deep it felt like a living thing. "Your Majesty," Magnus bowed low, the picture of reverence. "Your Grace," his eyes flicked to the gentle swell of my stomach. "Thank you for honoring this sacred rite." "As if we had a choice," I murmured under my breath. His smile was a thin, cold line. "Tonight we ask the goddess to grant our king peace and to shield the heirs he leaves behind from the shadow of his affliction." How generous. My magic stirred uneasily, pressing against the walls I'd built around it. We took our place facing the blood moon. The circle closed behind us with a soft rustle of robes. Magnus raised his hands. "Let the rite begin." Chanting rose around us, low and rhythmic. Elders passed bowls of smoking herbs, bitter sage and wolfsbane, the scent coiling into my lungs. Symbols were drawn on the stones in chalk and ash, lines intersecting in patterns I recognized from the forbidden texts, focusing sigils. But they weren't meant to channel a blessing. They were aiming a weapon. Alistair's hand tightened in mine. I could feel the tremor beneath his skin. Magnus began the main invocation, his voice rolling with a practiced fervor. "O goddess of blood and bone, see your servant weighed by duty in battle. Take what is owed, leave what is needed." The sigils around us flared with a dull red light. Power scraped over my skin like claws, seeking, measuring. Then it latched on. The weight in Alistair's chest surged, yanking at him like a hooked chain. He grasped, his body jerking as if struck. Our joined hands nearly tore apart. I grabbed his wrist with my free hand, fighting to keep him grounded. His wolf slammed against his cage, snarling in panic. The ritual wasn't asking for peace. It was inviting the curse to finish its work, to rip his wolf out and burn it as an offering, leaving his body an empty, dying shell. The elders' voices rose, a woven net of sound tightening around us. "Stop!" I snapped, my magic flaring despite my hold on it. "You're killing him!" Magnus's gaze cut to me, and for the first time he didn't bother to hide his contempt. "We are fulfilling the goddess's will. Do not interfere, girl." Girl, not queen, not healer, just the omega he thought he could control. Alistair crumpled to his knees, dragging me down with him. His face went bloodless, veins standing out in his neck as he fought for air. Through our bond, all I felt was pressure and burning, as if the curse were wrenching his soul from his body. Enough. Every instinct screamed to stay small, stay hidden, survive. But I looked at my husband on his knees in the dirt, under a sky the color of blood, and realized there was nothing left of that scared girl to protect. I let my shields fall. Magic roared up inside me, no longer careful threads or cautious pushes. It flooded me. The air around us crackled, the torch flames surged, then bowed inward, drawn to our center. Magnus's chant faltered. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "Saving my king." And I stepped forward, pulling Alistair to the very heart of their circle. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Wolf stumbled back as the pressure in the clearing spiked. The sigils on the stones blazed brighter, lines of power flaring under my feet, trying to trap me in their design. Fine, I'd use their own circle against them. I knelt before Alistair and pressed both hands to his chest. The curse hit me like a tidal wave, furious, ravenous. It drove images into my mind, wolves burning, crowns shattering, my own body lying still on cold stone, the twins silent within me. I pushed back. Light, blinding, white gold and hot, slammed out of me. It shot along the ritual lines like water through channels, racing around the circle, igniting every sigil until the entire pattern blazed with my power, not theirs. The elders shouted, some stumbled back. Magnus stood his ground, chanting faster, his voice rolling in desperate fury. Pain tore through me as the curse clawed at my magic, trying to rip it apart. For a moment, I wasn't sure where I ended and it began. I saw Alistair as it saw him, vessel, threat, prize. I saw his father choking on invisible hands in this same garden years ago. I saw Magnus's younger face, lips shaping the same words, drunk on stolen power. There, a thread, a single pulsing line of corruption connecting the curse to its source. In the blinding snarl of energy, I seized it. I followed that rotten line back through Alistair, through the crown, through the twisted old ritual, straight to the man standing before me. Magnus's aura blazed sickly, bound to the curse like a parasite that had learned to live with its host. "This isn't the goddess," I spat, my voice echoing with a power that didn't feel entirely my own. "You don't understand. I understand enough." I twisted. The magic screamed. The curse tried to snap away, but I held it, channeling every ounce of power I'd ever feared. I dragged it along the thread, pulling it from Alistair's heart strand by agonizing strand. It fought. It flayed my nerves raw. But for the first time, it wasn't just devouring. It was being pulled. The energy hit Magnus like a physical tempest. He staggered, hands flying to his chest, mouth opening in a silent, shocked cry. The lines of the circle flared white-hot, searing the patterns into the stone. For one heartbeat, we were linked, his terror pouring into me, my fury pouring into him. Then the curse chose. It abandoned Alistair. It chose the man who had fed it, nurtured it for decades. Magnus screamed. The sound was not human. His body arched, eyes rolling back, veins darkening as the corruption he'd wielded flooded into him. Power ripped through the circle, tearing at robes, blowing out torches. Wolves dropped to their knees. I held on until my vision widened out, until my muscles shook with the effort, until I felt the last rotten root tear free from Alistair's soul. Then I let go. The backlash threw me backward. Stone slammed into my spine. The world tilted, spun. For a moment, there was only ringing silence and the taste of blood in my mouth. Then I heard two things. Magnus's final, ragged shriek as his body collapsed in on itself, smoke rising from his mouth and eyes, and Alistair's hoarse, astonished gasp. I forced my eyes open. Magnus lay crumpled near the altar, limbs twisted, face frozen in a rictus of terror. The stench of burnt magic hung in the air. Alistair was on his hands and knees, breathing hard, but breathing. The suffocating pressure in our bond was gone. Not lessened, gone. He pressed his hand to his sternum, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Ilara," he whispered, looking at me as if seeing me for the first time. "I'm here," I rasped. Around us, wolves slowly rose to their feet. Dozens of eyes stared, some wide with fear, some blazing with something like awe. They had all just watched their Omega Queen step into a killing circle and walk out with the curse broken and its master dead at her feet. Alistair pushed himself up and crossed the small distance between us. His hands framed my face, thumbs brushing away blood and tears. "You saved me," he said, his voice thick. "I got tired of arguing with your impending death. Seemed simpler to kill the thing causing it." A laugh broke from him, half choked, half incredulous. He rested his forehead against mine. Then he turned to the silent, watching crowd, his voice ringing out, strong and clear for the first time in months. "Witness, the curse that bound my house is broken. The elder who twisted it is dead by his own corruption. My queen stands as proof." One by one, then in waves, the wolves in the garden dropped to one knee. Not all, but enough. Alistair's grip on me tightened. "They'll come for you now," he murmured, for my ears only. Some out of fear, some out of worship. I met his gaze, my body aching but my spirit blazing. "Let them try," I said. "I'm done hiding." Above us, the blood moon hung heavy, its light already washing paler, as if a stain had been scrubbed from the sky. Alistair's heart beat steady against my palm. The traitor was dead. And for the first time since a dying king had whispered a proposal in a silent throne room, the future didn't feel like a funeral march. It felt like a dawn. The days after the blood moon ritual passed in a blur of quiet upheaval. The palace was a different beast. Whispers no longer followed me like ghosts. They preceded me. Servants bowed lower, their eyes wide with a new kind of fear, edged with something like reverence. The curse breaker, they called me when they thought I couldn't hear. The Omega Queen who walked with the goddess. It made my skin crawl. I didn't walk with any goddess. I'd fought with stolen magic in sheer desperation. Alistair was different. The gray pallor was gone, replaced with a healthy, if still weary, warmth. He moved without the constant wince of hidden pain. He breathed deeply, laughed freely. The curse was gone, but its shadow lingered in the way he would sometimes stop and press his hand to his chest, as if amazed to find it light and easy. Our bond, once a thin, frayed thread strung with pain, had thickened. It hummed now with his steady strength and the bright double echo of the twins. I could feel his concern for me like a constant, gentle pressure against my own mind. "You're still tired," he said one morning, catching my hand as I tried to slip out of bed before dawn. "It was worth it," I said, which was the truth, but the exhaustion was bone deep. Breaking the curse had cost me. My magic felt thin, stretched, like a muscle torn and poorly mended. "The healers say you need rest, actual rest, not just lying awake worrying." "The kingdom doesn't run on rest," I muttered, but I let him pull me back against the pillows. For a few moments, we lay in silence, His heart beat a steady drum under my ear, his hand resting protectively over the swell of our children. This was the fragile peace we'd bought, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that it would not last. The first attack came not on us, but on the proof of our victory. I was in the healer's wing reviewing a shipment of yarrow and comfrey when Tamsin burst in, her face pale. "Your Majesty, the temple garden, you must come." My heart seized. Alistair was meeting with the border lords. He was safe. The bond told me that, but I ran anyway. The garden was cordoned off by guards. In the center of the scorched ritual circle, where Elder Magnus had fallen, someone had planted a single black iron arrow. It stood upright, driven into the stone, a tattered banner of midnight blue cloth tied beneath its head. The banner bore the insignia of the Shadowfang, a rogue pack from the northern mountains, believed to be scattered and leaderless. But everyone knew the legends. The Shadowfangs were mercenaries, killers for hire who left no trace but an arrow as a calling card. "When?" I asked, my voice calm despite the ice in my veins. "Sometime last night, Your Majesty," Captain Ryan, head of the Kingsguard, replied. "No one saw or heard a thing."
It was a message, a declaration. The traitor within the court might be dead, but the enemies he conspired with were very much alive, and they knew that with the curse broken, Alistair was no longer a dying king. He was a threat, and I, the healer who had broken their weapon, was a target. "Remove it," I said, "but do not destroy it. Have it taken to the armory. I want it studied." "Your Majesty, it could be poisoned, cursed." "All the more reason to understand it," I said, turning to leave. "Double the guard on the king and on the infirmary." I found Alistair in the strategy room. He'd already heard. The map before him was newly marked with red tokens in the north. "The Shadowfangs haven't been active in a decade," he said, not looking up. "Someone paid them. Someone with old ties and deep coffers." "The other conspirators," I said, sinking into a chair. The babies kicked, a flurry of movement, as if agitated by my fear. "Magnus wasn't working alone. You said it yourself. He couldn't have." It was a message, a declaration. The traitor within the court might be dead, but the enemies he conspired with were very much alive, and they knew that with the curse broken, Alistair was no longer a dying king. He was a threat, and I, the healer who had broken their weapon, was a target. "Remove it," I said, "but do not destroy it. Have it taken to the armory. I want it studied." "Your Majesty, it could be poisoned, cursed." "All the more reason to understand it," I said, turning to leave. "Double the guard on the king and on the infirmary." I found Alistair in the strategy room. He'd already heard. The map before him was newly marked with red tokens in the north. "The Shadowfangs haven't been active in a decade," he said, not looking up. "Someone paid them. Someone with old ties and deep coffers." "The other conspirators," I said, sinking into a chair. The babies kicked, a flurry of movement, as if agitated by my fear. "Magnus wasn't working alone. You said it yourself. He couldn't have altered the ritual by himself." "Now they're cleaning house," Alistair finished, his gaze finally meeting mine. It was hard, kingly, but beneath it I saw the fear, not for himself, but for me, for our children. "The arrow isn't a threat, it's a promise. They're telling us they can get anywhere, even here." "So what do we do?" "We find them first." He pushed a ledger toward me. It was a record of Magnus's private correspondences, seized from his chambers. He was careful, but everyone leaves a trail. For hours we pored over the cryptic entries, mentions of the northern ore, shipments of blue cloth, and repeated payments to a Master T. It was a puzzle with half the pieces missing. It was Lady Cordelia who found the connection. She entered silently, placing a smaller, older book on the table. It was a trade ledger from the royal mines. Blue cloth isn't just a color, it's a code. Blue cloth shipments refer to shipments of Siren's Bane.
I went cold. Siren's Bane was a rare, fragile ore, useless for weapons or tools, but when ground and mixed with blood, it was a potent conductor for dark, binding magic, the very magic used in bloodline curses. "The mines are in the north," Alistair said softly, "near the old Shadowfang territories." The trail was leading us out of the palace, into the wild, contested borders of the kingdom, to where our enemies had been quietly mining the poison for their schemes. "We need to send someone to the mines," I said, "to see who's been buying the ore." "It's too dangerous," Alistair said immediately. "If they catch a royal scout—" "Then we don't send a scout," I interrupted. I took a deep breath. The idea had been forming since I saw the arrow. We send someone they won't suspect, someone who looks like they belong nowhere near a mine or a conspiracy. They both stared at me. "No," Alistair said, the word absolute. "I'm the only one who can sense the residue of the magic they're using, my voice low but urgent. My magic can feel it. I can find what others would miss. And as an Omega, heavily pregnant, I am the last person they would expect to be investigating them. I could go with a small trade caravan, disguised." "It is madness," Lady Cordelia said, but her eyes were calculating. "It is the only path forward that isn't waiting for the next arrow to find its mark in your back or our children's cradle." I looked at Alistair, pleading now. "We said we face this together. No more secrets, no more hiding. Let me use what I am to protect what is ours." The struggle on his face was a war. The Alpha King wanted to cage his queen, keep her safe behind stone walls. The man who trusted her knew she was right. "A small caravan," he said finally, each word dragged out of him. "Captain Ryan and 2 of his most trusted, disguised as drivers. You are a herbalist's apprentice seeking rare mountain moss for remedies. You are never out of their sight. You are back in 10 days, not one more." He stood and came to me, cupping my face. "If you are not back in 10 days, he whispered, his forehead touching mine, "I will burn the northern mountains to the ground to find you." It was a promise and a confession of his own terror. 3 days later, dressed in coarse woolen clothes, my hair braided and hidden under a scarf, my hands stained with pretend dirt, I climbed into the back of a covered merchant's wagon. My heart hammered against my ribs. The twins were quiet, as if sensing the gravity of the journey. As the wagon lurched forward, away from the palace, I looked back once. Alistair stood on a high balcony, a dark, solitary figure watching us go. The path ahead led into the cold, rugged north, towards answers, and towards the people who had tried to kill my king and would now be coming for me. The hidden healer was done hiding. Now she was hunting. The north was a land of teeth, jagged peaks biting at a steel-gray sky, wind that howled like a mourning wolf, and air so thin and cold it burned the lungs. Our small caravan, 2 wagons laden with mundane trade goods, crawled along the narrow mountain passes like beetles on a stone. I was a Lara no longer. I was Elle, a mute herbalist's apprentice, my face perpetually half hidden by a scarf, my hands stained with pretend dirt. Captain Ryan and his 2 men, Kale and Bren, were our drivers, gruff, silent men who smelled of pine and leather, not palace polish. No one looked at us twice. That was the point. But I felt it. With every league north, the faint, sickly resonance grew stronger. It was a buzz at the back of my teeth, a pull behind my navel, the echo of Siren's Bane, of dark magic. My own power, still weary from breaking the curse, stirred uneasily in response. On the 4th day, we reached Ironcross, a mining town clinging to the side of a mountain like lichen. It was a place of grim faces, muddy streets, and the constant, deep-throated thump, thump, thump of the mine's great pumps. The air smelled of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and underneath it all, the faint, sweet, metallic tang of the bane. We took a room at a ramshackle inn.
That night, as rain lashed the shutters, we gathered in the cramped space. The main mine is owned by the Crown, Rion said. On the fourth day, we reached Iron Cross, a mining town clinging to the side of a mountain like lichen. It was a place of grim faces, muddy streets, and the constant, deep-throated thump, thump, thump of the mine's great pumps. The air smelled of coal smoke, unwashed bodies, and underneath it all, the faint, sweet, metallic tang of the bane. We took a room at a ramshackle inn. That night, as rain lashed the shutters, we gathered in the cramped space. The main mine is owned by the Crown, Rion said, his voice a low rumble. But there are old closed-off shafts in the Blacktooth Peak, the ones listed in the ledger. That's where they'd be taking illegal shipments. How do we get in? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Kael, the younger of the guards with sharp eyes, unfolded a scrap of parchment. There's a foreman, Garvin. He likes coin and hates questions. For the right price, he might look the other way while we get lost near the old shafts. It was a flimsy plan, but it was all we had. The next afternoon, while Rion and Bren negotiated with Garvin, Kael and I slipped away, disguised as simple workers heading for a collapsed tunnel that needed inspecting. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat screaming that this was a terrible idea. The old shaft was a gash in the mountain, its entrance partially boarded up. A heavy, stale silence hung over it, broken only by the distant sounds of the working mine. The pull was undeniable here, a magnetic, nauseating tug. Still close, Kael murmured, his hand on his dagger. We ducked inside. The world fell into darkness and damp. Kael lit a small lantern. The walls glittered with embedded ore, not the dull iron, but streaks of a deep, iridescent blue that seemed to drink the light. Siren's bane. I reached out, my fingers hovering an inch from the wall. My magic recoiled, then reached back, tasting the residue. It was the same signature, the same cruel, binding energy that had composed Alistair's curse. This is it, I breathed. We moved deeper, following the trail of the ore. The tunnel branched, and we took the left fork where the pull was strongest. The air grew colder, thinner. Then the tunnel opened into a rough-hewn cavern, and there we found their secret. It wasn't just raw ore. Crates were stacked against one wall. Open ones revealed the bane, already ground to a fine, glittering powder. Ledgers sat on a makeshift desk, and on a small, clean altar at the center of the cavern sat something that stopped my heart. A doll. A crude, twisted thing made of dark wool and leather. Stuck through its cloth heart was a long silver pin, and wrapped around it a lock of familiar dark hair. Alistair's hair. This was no mere mining operation. This was a workshop, a place where the physical components of blood magic were prepared. The doll was a focus, a way to maintain the curse's connection from afar. Magnus might have been the weaver, but he hadn't worked alone, and his tools were still here, waiting. "Goddess above," Kael whispered, horror in his voice. I stepped forward, my hand reaching for the doll. I had to destroy it. Whatever lingering tie it represented, it had to be severed. My fingers were an inch from the pin when a voice, smooth as oiled steel, slithered from the shadows behind us. "I wouldn't touch that if I were you. It's been ever so helpful." We spun. A man stepped from a hidden crevice in the rock. He was tall, dressed not in miner's rags, but in fine, dark traveling clothes. His hair was silver, his face handsome and sharp, and his eyes were the pale, cold blue of glacier ice. I knew him. Lord Theron, a mid-level noble from the western provinces. He was on the council. He had voted against our marriage. He had bowed low after the curse-breaking, his face a mask of congratulatory awe. "Lord Theron," I said, my voice shockingly steady. "The mountains are far from your vineyards."
He smiled, a thin, cruel stretch of lips. Your Majesty, or should I say I must admit the pregnant Omega disguise is inspired. I almost didn't believe the reports. He took a step closer. Kael moved in front of me, his dagger drawn. Reports? I asked, buying time, my mind racing. From the innkeeper, from Garvin. You really shouldn't flash that much royal gold in a place like this. It draws the wrong kind of attention. His gaze flicked to the doll. Magnus was a fool. He grew arrogant. He thought the curse was his alone to wield. We simply managed the supply, and when he failed, we knew we had to deal with the unexpected variable. You. We, I echoed. How many of you? Enough, he said simply. He didn't look afraid. He looked pleased. The Shadow Fang arrow was a test, to see if you'd run to the king or run to the source. You chose the source, brave and very, very stupid. He raised a hand. From the shadows behind him, 2 more men emerged from the shadows. They weren't minors. They moved with a lethal grace of trained killers. Their eyes held no mercy. Take the guard alive. He might be useful. The queen... The accident of a fallen tunnel is so tragic for one in her condition. Kael lunged. The cavern erupted into violence. I stumbled back, my hands flying to protect my stomach. My magic surged, not to fight, but to shield. A golden, faintly shimmering dome of light flickered around me. Weak, but there. One of the assassins slammed into it and was thrown back with a snarl of surprise. Theron's eyes lit with avaricious interest. So the rumors are true. Not just a healer, something more. Kael was a whirlwind of steel, but he was outnumbered. He fought with desperate skill, keeping them between me and the attackers. Run, my lady, he shouted, parrying a blow that would have taken his head. But run where? The tunnel behind us was the only way out, and Theron stood before it. My eyes fell on the altar, on the doll and the pin. If it was a focus, perhaps it worked both ways. I dropped my shield, ignoring the clashing steel, ignoring Theron's shout. I reached out and yanked the silver pin from the doll's heart. A shockwave of cold, malignant energy blasted out from it. The lanterns guttered, the assassins staggered. But I held on, and I poured my own magic, not into healing, but into unraveling down the connection the pin represented.
I saw it then, not with my eyes, but with my power. A spider web of faint, dark threads stretching from the doll, out of the mountain, across the kingdom, connecting to other minds, other traitors. One thread, thick and dark, led straight to the smiling Lord Theron. You, I whispered, my voice vibrating with power. You're all connected. His smile vanished. Kill her, now! An assassin broke from Kael and charged me. I didn't move. I focused on the thread connecting Theron to the doll, to the magic, to the conspiracy, and I pulled. It wasn't like breaking the curse. This was smaller, sharper. I didn't have the strength to destroy it, but I could tug. Theron screamed, a short, sharp sound of agony. He clutched his head, his eyes wide with shock and pain. The connection worked both ways. Hurting the focus hurt the wielder. The assassin hesitated, confused by his master's distress. It was all the opening Kael needed. He moved like lightning, his blade finding its mark. The assassin fell. The other turned to flee, but Kael was on him. In the sudden silence, broken only by ragged breathing, Lord Theron slumped against the cavern wall, staring at me with a mixture of hatred and terror. You can't win, he spat, blood trickling from his nose. The web is vast. You've only found one strand. Then I'll find the next, I said, coldness settling in my heart. I held up the pin, and the next, until I've unraveled it all. Captain Rian and Bren burst into the cavern then, their swords drawn, having fought their way past Theron's men outside. It was over. As they bound the stunned lord, I looked at the doll in my hand, then at the glittering, poisonous ores surrounding us. We had found a source. We had caught a traitor. But he was right. This was just one strand, and the web was still out there, waiting to ensnare us all. The return to the palace was a somber, hurried journey. Lord Theron, bound and gagged, traveled in the second wagon, a prisoner shrouded in canvas. He spoke no more, but his pale, hate-filled eyes watched me whenever he could. The pull of the siren's bane faded with each mile, but a new weight had settled on me, the knowledge of the conspiracy's true scale. It wasn't one bitter elder, it was a network, a cancer woven into the very fabric of the kingdom. Alistair was waiting in the courtyard when we arrived, his face etched with a fear that only dissolved when he saw me, whole and unharmed, step from the wagon. He crossed the distance in swift strides and pulled me into an embrace so tight it squeezed the air from my lungs. His face was buried in my scarf for a long moment, his shoulders trembling with relief. "Never again," he murmured against my hair. "I will never let you do that again." I didn't argue. I just held him, feeling the solid, curse-free beat of his heart, letting it steady my own. Then he saw Theron being dragged from the wagon. His expression hardened into the mask of the Alpha King. "Take him to the black cells," he commanded, his voice like winter stone. "No one sees him, no one speaks to him but me." The interrogation lasted through the night. I wasn't allowed in the dungeon, Alistair was adamant, but I felt the echoes of it through our bond, his rage, his cold, surgical determination, and underneath, a growing dread. He came to our chambers at dawn, looking more weary than after any battle. He carried the doll from the cavern, now wrapped in black silk. "He talked," Alistair said, his voice hoarse. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed. He talked, not out of loyalty, but out of self-preservation. He believes his allies will silence him if he remains quiet, so he named names, to save his own skin. He unwrapped the doll and placed it between us. The lock of hair looked obscene in the morning light. "The web, it's as you felt. Theron was the quartermaster. He supplied the bane. Magnus was the ritualistic, the weaver. But the design, the purpose, came from higher up." My blood went cold. Higher than a high elder? "A faction within the royal council itself," Alistair said, the words dropping like stones. "Not to destroy the crown, but to control it. The curse was a leash. With me as a dying, obedient king and a council pulling the strings, they could rule without challenge. My father resisted their policies, the expansion north, the taxation of the Omegas, the alliance with the coastal slavers, so they leashed him. When I showed the same stubbornness, they tightened the leash." He passed me a list, 5 names. 3 were elders, 1 was the master of the coin, the last was the general of the eastern armies. The betrayal was so deep it stole my breath. These were the pillars of the kingdom, men who had smiled at our wedding, who had bowed after the curse-breaking. "What do we do?" I whispered. "If we move against them all at once, it will look like a purge. It could cause panic, even civil war." "We don't move against them all at once," Alistair said, a dangerous glint in his eye. He pointed to the doll. "You said the connection works both ways. This doll is a focus, tied to their shared working. Can you use it to listen?" The idea was terrifying, to reach my magic into that web of dark intent, but I understood. We needed proof, not the ravings of a single prisoner, but undeniable evidence of their conspiracy. "I can try, but it will be dangerous. If they sense me, then we make sure they don't." He took my hands. "We do it together. My power is clean now, strong. I can shield you. I can be your anchor." And so, in the deepest hour of the next night, we began. The doll sat between us on the floor of our sealed chambers. Our hands rested on it, mine covering the pinprick in its heart, Alistair's covering mine. "Ready?" he asked, his power a warm, solid fortress around my mind. I nodded.
closed my eyes, and let a single hair-thin strand of my magic seep into the doll. The world fell away into a cacophony of whispers. It was a torrent of dark thought, ambition, fear, and malice. I felt the greasy satisfaction of the master of the coin, counting the riches control would bring. I felt the cold military strategy of the general, seeing the kingdom as a game board. I felt the fervent, warped belief of the elders that they were saving the kingdom from a weak king. I sifted through the noise, following the threads, and I found them. Not planning, not now, they were too scared after Theron's disappearance, but remembering. I saw glimpses of meetings in secret chambers, heard fragments of plans. The curse was just phase 1. Phase 2 was to control the heir, should one be born, to raise a puppet prince. My stomach turned. They were discussing my children.
Then I brushed against a mind sharper than the others, colder. It felt like touching ice wrapped in velvet. This mind noticed the slight disturbance in the web. It paused, questing. What was that? The thought was not words, but pure intent, laced with suspicion. I recoiled, yanking my magic back. I slammed into my own body with a gasp, my head pounding. Alistair caught me as I swayed. They know, I panted. One of them, he felt me. Did you get what we need? I looked at him, my eyes wide with the horror of what I'd heard. More than enough. And Alistair, they have plans for the twins, for after you're gone. His face went utterly still, then darkened with a rage so profound the air in the room seemed to chill. That, he said softly, changes everything. He did not act rashly. That was not his way. Over the next 2 days, while I rested and recovered, he worked with Lady Cordelia and Captain Ryan. Warrants were drawn up with meticulous care, citing evidence of treason, corruption, and conspiracy to use dark magic against the crown. The evidence was the memories I have pulled, which Alistair and Cordelia translated into dates, locations, and witness testimonies that could be discovered through investigation. They were taken at dawn, quietly from their homes. There was no dramatic scene in the council chamber. By the time the rest of the court finished breakfast, the 5 most powerful traders in the kingdom were already in the black cells, and their offices were being sealed by the king's guard. The shock wave was immediate and profound, but it was not the chaos we feared. It was a stunned, fearful silence. The evidence, when Alistair presented it to the remaining council, was overwhelming. The ledgers from the mine, Theron's confession, the magical focus, the testimony of Captain Ryan about the assassins. It painted a picture so vile that even those who might have sympathized with the traitors' goals were horrified by their methods. The kingdom held its breath. And in that silence, Alistair did something revolutionary. He stood before the assembled nobles and guildmasters and did not appoint new elders from the same old families. Instead, he announced a great moot, a gathering of representatives from every pack, every province, every guild, and yes, even the Omega shelters, to be held after the birth of the heirs, to redesign the council, to build a new foundation. The old ways bred this corruption, he declared, his voice echoing in the silent hall. We will build new ones, together. As I watched him from the place beside the throne, my hand resting on the lives growing within me, I saw not just a king who had survived, but a king who had learned, a king who understood that true strength wasn't in ruling alone, but in building something that could stand without chains, without curses, without fear. The web was unraveling, not with violence, but with truth and with the promise of something better. Later, in our chambers, he knelt before me, his head resting gently on my stomach. The twins kicked in response, a flurry of joyful movement. "They're safe," he murmured. "You kept them safe. You kept us all safe." "We did it together," I said, running my fingers through his dark hair. He looked up, his storm-gray eyes clear and full of a love that had grown quietly, fiercely, in the soil of shared struggle. "I once asked you for an heir to save a dying line. You gave me a future worth living for." Outside, the first true snow of winter began to fall, blanketing the palace in silent, clean white. It felt like a blessing, like a new beginning. But as I watched the flakes dance past the window, a single cold thought lingered in the back of my mind. The sharp, cold mind in the web had felt my touch, and he had not been caught. Winter tightened its grip on the kingdom, a deep, quiet cold that mirrored the strange peace that had settled over the palace. The arrests had been an earthquake, but the aftershocks were manageable. A few distant cousins of the traitors grumbled, but with the evidence laid bare, no one dared raise a banner in revolt. The world outside our walls was holding its breath, waiting to see what the cursed king and his Omega Queen would build from the ashes. I grew heavier, slower. The twins were a constant, wondrous pressure, tumbling and kicking as if eager to meet the world. Alistair was a transformed man. The shadows were gone from under his eyes. He moved with an easy strength that made my heart sing. He spent his days in a whirlwind of planning for the great moot, but his evenings were ours. He would read to my stomach, tell the babies stories of brave wolves and clever foxes, his voice a low, soothing rumble that lulled us all. It was during one of these quiet evenings, a week before the midwinter feast, that the first thread of the old fear pulled taut. I was in the library searching for a text on early childhood development in wolf-born twins, a comically normal quest that still felt surreal, when I felt it, a faint, familiar tug, not from my own magic and not from the bond with Alistair. It was colder, thinner, a ghost of a sensation, like a spider's thread brushing against my awareness. It came from the West Wing, the sealed archives where the traitors' confiscated belongings were stored. I stood still, a heavy book in my hands, my blood turning to ice. The feeling vanished as quickly as it had come. "Alara?" Alistair's voice came from the doorway. He took one look at my face and was at my side in an instant. "What is it?" I felt something, from the archives, like the web, but just for a second. His expression grew serious, but not panicked. A residual echo? Perhaps from an object they stored there? "Perhaps," I said, but I didn't believe it. An echo wouldn't have felt so intentional, so much like a tap on a window pane. He took the book from my shaking hands. "We'll have the archives searched again. Every item cleansed or destroyed. I'll have Ryan do it himself." I nodded, letting his certainty calm me. It was probably nothing. Nerves, the deep instinctual fear of a mother whose peace had been hard won. The search the next day yielded nothing. Captain Ryan reported the archives were clean. The few objects with magical residue, a signet ring and a ceremonial dagger, had been sent to the temple for purification. I tried to forget the feeling. 2 nights later, it happened again. I was asleep when a jolt went through me. Not a kick from the babies, but that same cold, thin pull. This time it was closer. It came from within the palace walls, somewhere near the servants' quarters. It lingered for a few heartbeats, a faint, discordant note in the peaceful symphony of the sleeping castle, then faded. This time I woke Alistair. He listened, his face grave in the moonlight. "Could it be you?" he asked, gently, his hand on my swollen stomach. "Your magic is tied to life, to them. Could it be changing as they grow?" It was a reasonable question. My power had been dormant, then used for war, then drained. I had no map for what it might do during a double pregnancy. "Maybe," I conceded, but the doubt was a seed, taking root. The next afternoon, during a meeting with the palace stewards about supplies for the great moot, the third thread pulled. I was sipping mint tea, listening to a debate about woolens, when a wave of dizziness hit me. The cold pull was back, stronger, accompanied by a spike of nausea. It felt like it was right behind me. I spun in my chair, but there was only the tapestry-covered wall. "Your Majesty?" Lady Cordelia asked, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "A moment of lightheadedness," I said, forcing a smile.
The babies are demanding their lunch, I think." The meeting was adjourned. Alistair, summoned by a look from Cordelia, found me in our solar, my face pale. "It's not me, Alistair," my voice trembling with a new, chilling certainty. "It's not the pregnancy. Something is here, in the palace. It's reaching for me, testing the edges of my senses." He didn't dismiss it. He knelt before me, taking my cold hands in his warm ones. "Describe it." "It's like the web, but solitary, a single thread, cold, intelligent. It doesn't feel angry or chaotic like the curse did. It feels patient, observant." "The one who felt you," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The sharp mind in the web. You said he wasn't caught." A new kind of fear, cold and slick, coiled in my gut. We had torn the web apart, but what if we had missed its spider? What if the master weaver, the one who designed it all, had been watching from the shadows and was now curious? "He's looking for the source of the disturbance," I breathed. "He felt me in the web that night, and now he's looking for the new power that broke his toy." Alistair's face set into lines of iron. Then we set a trap. His plan was simple and terrifying. If this presence was drawn to my magic, we would give it a controlled, tantalizing taste. We would use the doll, the cleaned, purified focus from the cavern, as bait. We would stage a cleansing ritual in the old, disused temple beneath the palace, a place easy to seal and guard. I would use a tiny thread of power on the doll, and we would wait. "It's too dangerous," I argued. "What if he's stronger?" "He works from the shadows, Alara. That is his strength. In the light, surrounded by my guards, with me at your side, it is our strength. We need to see his face. We need to know who we are truly fighting." I knew he was right. We couldn't live with this phantom fear, not with the twins coming, not with the future we were trying to build. The trap was set for the following night. The undertemple was a circular stone room, lit by torches. The doll sat on a plain stone altar. Alistair stood in the shadows by the door, a solid, reassuring presence. 4 of Ryan's best men were hidden in alcoves around the room. My heart hammered. I stood before the altar, took a deep breath, and placed a single finger on the doll. I let the smallest, finest thread of my healing light, warm, golden, alive, flow into it. For a minute, nothing. Then the air in the room grew still. The torch flames didn't flicker. They just burned lower, as if something was drinking the warmth from the room. The cold pull became a yank. A figure materialized from the deepest shadow in the corner, a place the guards had checked twice. He didn't step out. He simply seemed to gather the darkness around him and step forward. He was tall, draped in a hooded cloak of no color at all. It seemed to shift between gray and black. His face was in shadow, but I could feel his gaze, intelligent and chilling, fixed on me. "So," a voice said, smooth, cultured, and utterly devoid of warmth. "The source of the ripple. I expected a grizzled old shaman, not a glowing mother-to-be. How delightful." Alistair moved from the door, placing himself between me and the figure. "Reveal yourself." The figure gave a soft, mocking laugh. "Titles are so fleeting, King Alistair. You may call me Silas. I was your father's tutor once, a long time ago." A tutor, a teacher of history, of law, of magic? The pieces clicked with horrible clarity. The designer, not a politician or a general, but a scholar, a man who understood power, bloodlines, and symbols better than anyone. "You designed the curse," I said, my voice steady despite my fear. "I designed a system of balance," Silas corrected, his tone that of a patient teacher. "A safe sail to prevent rash kings from destroying centuries of tradition. Your husband and his father were both impulsive. The leash was for the good of the kingdom." "You tried to murder him," I snapped. A king who cannot be controlled is a danger. A king who breaks his leash is an existential threat. And you, little healer, you are the unforeseen variable, a power that shouldn't exist in an Omega. You didn't just break the leash, you melted it. I had to see for myself. He took a step forward. Alistair growled, a deep alpha warning that vibrated in the stone. Silas paused. I mean you no harm tonight. I am merely a curious observer. But know this. You have unbalanced a very old, very careful equation. Nature abhors a vacuum, and power, true power, always seeks its own level. He began to fade, the darkness peeling back from him as if he were stepping backward into a pool of ink. You won't leave this room, Alistair, snarled Alistair, nodding to his guards. They moved, but their swords passed through the dissolving shadow as if through smoke. This is just a whisper, King Alistair, a thought I sent to see. Silas's voice was growing distant. But we will speak again when the equation demands rebalancing. He was gone. The torches flared back to life. The room was empty, but for us, the guards, and the doll on the altar. The cold pull was gone, leaving behind a silence more terrifying than any threat. Alistair was at my side, his arms around me. He's gone. But he wasn't, really. Silas was out there, a spider who had lost his web, but not his venom. He had seen me. He knew what I was.
And he had promised we would meet again. I looked down at my stomach, at the lives I carried, and felt the hard-won peace of the last few weeks shatter like thin ice. The storm wasn't over. We had just been standing in its eye. The silence after Silas's visitation was worse than any threat. It was a promise, hanging in the air of the palace, like a sword on a single fraying thread. The knowledge that the true architect of our suffering was not a captured traitor, but a phantom with a scholar's mind and a shadow's heart, poisoned our hard-won peace. Alistair became a fortress. Guards were tripled. The palace healers, now under my direction, screened every servant, every new guest for magical residue. The air grew tense, watchful. But Silas did not strike. There were no more cold pulls, no spectral visitations. He had said his piece and vanished back into the legend he'd become. It was the silence of a predator waiting for its prey to weaken. And I was weakening. The final weeks of my pregnancy were a physical trial that drained my already depleted magic. The twins were strong, active, and enormous. Simple walks left me breathless. Sleep was a fleeting visitor. My power, which usually hummed just beneath my skin, felt dormant, diverted, pouring every ounce of its strength into nurturing the two lives within me. I felt like a vessel, emptying myself into the future. Alistair watched me with constant, simmering worry. He tried to hide it, covering it with action, finalizing plans for the great moot, reviewing security, building the world he wanted for his children. But at night, when he thought I slept, I'd feel his hand resting on my stomach, his fear a soft, dark echo in our bond. He was afraid of Silas, but more than that, he was afraid for me. "You're giving them everything," he whispered one night, his lips against my temple. "It's how it's meant to be," I murmured back, though the cost felt terrifyingly high. What would be left of me, the healer, when this was over? The midwinter feast came and went, a subdued affair, overshadowed by tension. Then, on a night so still the stars looked nailed to the sky, the storm within me broke. It began not with pain, but with a profound, deep knowing, a certainty that settled in my soul. It was time. I reached out in the dark and found Alistair's hand. He was already awake. "Now," I said, and the word was both a plea and a command. The palace, so tense and quiet, erupted into quiet, efficient chaos. The royal healers, led by the now respectful master healer Orin, took charge.
Lady Cordelia became a general, directing maids with hot water and linens. Alistair, defying all tradition, refused to leave. He stood by my side, his presence a solid rock in the rising sea of pain. Labor was a mountain, and I had to climb it twice. There was no magic for this journey. This was the oldest, most primal kind of work. Pain like a tide, ebbing and flowing, pulling me under and spitting me back onto a shore of gasps, breaths, and crushing pressure. Alistair's hand was my anchor. His voice, reading old ballads, talking nonsense to the babies, whispering encouragement, was my guide. When the first wave crested, I thought I would break. The world narrowed to a white-hot point of agony. "He's coming," Master Oren said, his voice calm. "One more push, Your Majesty, for your son." My son. The words gave me strength I didn't know I had. I pushed, with my body, with my spirit, with every fiber of my being. And then he was there. He entered the world not with a whimper, but with a sound that was half cry, half defiant growl. Tiny, perfect, slick with life. They placed him on my chest, and his warmth flooded through me. He had a shock of dark hair, his eyes squeezed shut, his tiny fists already clenched. His aura didn't just flare, it ignited, a brilliant, fierce gold and silver light that filled the room with the scent of a summer storm. A true alpha, strong and bold as his father. Tears streamed down my face. Alistair made a sound like a sob, his hand trembling as he touched his son's head. "Lysander," he breathed, the name we had chosen for a warrior of light. I had only a moment to cradle him, to feel the shocking, perfect reality of him, before the next contraction tore through me, sharper and more urgent than the first. "The second one is eager," Master Oren said, his hands gentle but firm. "She's not waiting her turn." She didn't. Our second child arrived with a swiftness that stole my breath. There was no fierce growl, but a soft, clear cry that cut through the air like a bell. As they laid her on my other shoulder, a wave of pure, gentle warmth flowed from her tiny form. It was my own magic, echoed back, a soft gold and green glow that felt like sunlight on new leaves, like the first breath of spring, a gentle, powerful healer soul. "Arya," I whispered, the name for a song of light, and kissed her damp forehead. Alistair sank to his knees beside the bed, his arms encircling us all, his queen, his son, his daughter. He was weeping openly, tears cutting tracks through the worry and fear of months. In his eyes, I saw the dying king from the throne room finally, completely vanish. Here was a father, a man with a future. We were a tangled, messy, glorious knot of new life and exhausted love. For a day and a night, the world shrank to our chambers. The twins fed and slept and wailed. Alistair learned to swaddle and sway, his big hands impossibly gentle. I drifted in a haze of bone-deep fatigue and overwhelming joy, my magic sleeping deeply, my body healing. The peace felt absolute, sacred. It was broken on the second evening. Arya was fussing, and my milk hadn't fully come in. A young wet nurse, a kind-faced beta named Ilara, a namesake that had made me smile, was brought in to help. She was new, vetted by Cordelia herself. She cooed softly to Arya, feeding her with a gentle touch. I was half asleep, Lysander nestled in the crook of my arm, when I felt it. A faint, cold thread, not pulling at me, brushing against Arya. My eyes flew open. The wet nurse, Ilara, was humming, but her eyes, fixed on my daughter's face, held not tender affection, but a sharp, calculating focus. And around her, so faint only my hypersensitive maternal magic could sense, was a faint shimmer of illusion, a mask over her true features. Silas hadn't come himself. He'd sent a puppet, and his target wasn't me, or Alistair. It was my children.
"Get away from her," I said, my voice low but crackling with a power I didn't know I still possessed.
The woman's head snapped up. Her kind facade melted away, revealing sharp, cold features and eyes as dark as a pit. "She's the key," the impostor hissed. "The healer's power, born fresh, so much easier to mold than a broken queen." She moved, not to flee, but to snatch Arya from the crib. I didn't think. I didn't summon my magic. I was my magic. A raw, protective surge of golden light erupted from me, not as a weapon, but as a shield. It wrapped around Arya, around Lysander, around me, forming a blazing, holy dome in the center of the room. The impostor screamed as she touched it, her hands smoking, the illusion around her dissolving completely to reveal a gaunt, scarred woman with dead eyes. The door burst open. Alistair and 2 guards stood there, having heard the commotion. He took in the scene, the screaming stranger, the glowing shield, his terrified children, and his alpha rage filled the room, a physical pressure. The impostor turned, a dagger now in her unhurt hand, her eyes desperate. She couldn't reach the babies, so she lunged for the next best target, the weakened queen. She never made it. Alistair crossed the room in a blur. There was no duel, no fancy swordplay. One moment she was lunging, the next Alistair's arm was around her throat. A short, brutal twist, and she crumpled to the floor, lifeless. The silence that followed was louder than the screams. My shield flickered and died. I was shaking, empty, the last dregs of my power spent. But the babies were safe. Lysander was wailing in outrage. Arya, in her crib, let out a soft, confused whimper. Alistair was at my side in an instant, pulling me and our son into his arms, his body trembling with adrenaline and fury. "I'm here. You're safe. They're safe." Guards swarmed the room, removing the body, checking for others. Lady Cordelia arrived, her face ashen with guilt and fury. The real wet nurse was found bound in a linen closet. "I failed you." "We all failed," Alistair said, his voice a gravelly rumble. He played on our joy, our relief. He looked at me, his eyes haunted. He will keep coming, for them, as long as he sees their power as a threat or a tool. I looked at my children, my fierce storm, my gentle light. The fear was a cold stone in my gut, but beneath it, something else was rising, a ferocity deeper than any magic, older than any curse, maternal fury. "No," I said, and my voice was quiet, but it filled the room. Alistair looked at me, seeing not the exhausted queen, but the woman who'd walked into a ritual circle and shattered a curse. "What are you thinking?" I held his gaze, the plan forming with crystal clarity. We don't wait for him in the shadows. We don't hide our children like treasures in a vault. We force him into the light. We end this, not for us, for them. I glanced at the twins, their auras now calm, glowing softly in the peaceful dark of the room. We finish it, on our terms, at the great moot. A slow, grim smile touched Alistair's lips. It was the smile of a king who'd been backed into a corner for the last time. "We finish it," he agreed. The game of shadow and silence was over. Now we would bring the dawn. The Great Moot was to be the rebirth of the kingdom. Representatives from every corner of the realm, rugged northern pack alphas, wealthy southern merchants, stern eastern generals, and for the first time, delegates from the Omega shelters and the human settlements within our borders streamed into the capital. The palace buzzed with a chaotic, hopeful energy. Banners flew, not just of the royal house, but of dozens of different peoples, a tapestry of a nation trying to weave itself anew. And in the center of it all, in the rebuilt and expanded Great Hall, was the new royal family. We did not hide. On the first day of the moot, Alistair and I entered the hall together. I walked beside him, not behind. In my arms, I carried Lysander, wrapped in a blanket of storm gray. In Alistair's arms, swathed in spring green, was Arya. Our power was on display, not as a threat, but as a promise. His alpha strength, steady and unshakable. My healer's light, gentle but unwavering. And between us, the two new souls, their auras a brilliant, intertwined testament to the future. The hall fell silent, then erupted in cheers. It wasn't the reluctant obedience of before, it was hope given sound. Alistair spoke first, his voice carrying to the farthest corner without strain. He spoke of the corruption that had festered in the dark. He spoke of the curse, now broken. He spoke of betrayal and justice. And then he spoke of the moot's true purpose, not for him to dictate, but to listen, to build a council of voices, not just of blood. It was a revolution wrapped in a speech. I spoke next, my voice softer but clear. I spoke of healing, not just of bodies, but of divisions. I announced the founding of the Royal Healers Collegium, open to all with the gift, regardless of rank or breed. I saw omegas in the crowd straighten, tears in their eyes. I saw hard-bitten alphas nod in thoughtful respect. We were showing them a new kind of strength, unity, transparency. And all the while, I felt it, the watchful, cold presence. Silas was here, somewhere in this crowd of thousands, wearing another face, hidden by another illusion. He couldn't resist. The gathering of so much power, the unveiling of his prized targets, it was a lure he couldn't ignore. We had made the moot a stage, and we were the bait. The days proceeded with debates, proposals, and surprising harmony, but underneath the hopeful current, Alistair, Ryan, Cordelia, and I ran our own silent operation. We had seated the crowd with trusted guards and healers trained to sense magical dissonance. We watched for the slightest chill, the faintest pull. It came on the third day, during a recess. I was in a side chamber nursing Arya when the familiar cold thread brushed against my senses. It wasn't aimed at me or the babies this time. It was probing the edges of the hall itself, tasting the magical signatures of the delegate, searching for weakness, for influence. He was mapping the new web.
I sent a pulse of warmth down my bond to Alistair, a prearranged signal. He's here. He's working. The trap was set to spring that evening, during the Feast of Unity. The great hall was transformed. Long tables groaned with food from every province. Music filled the air. It was a celebration of survival. Alistair and I sat at the high table, the twins sleeping in a protected, blessed bassinet beside us, watched over by Captain Ryan himself. I felt Silas's presence solidify. He was close. He was drawn to the concentration of power at the high table, to the unprotected-looking babes. As the feast reached its peak, Alistair stood to give a final toast. He raised his cup, speaking of a future written together. That's when Silas made his move. A delegate near the front, a minor southern lord, suddenly stood. But his movement was wrong, too fluid. His face shimmered and melted away, revealing the tall, scholarly figure from the undertemple, Silas. A gasp ripped through the hall. Guards moved, but he was already raising a hand. Darkness, cold and silencing, flowed from him, not to attack, but to shroud, to create confusion, to blind. It was a mist of shadows, swallowing torchlight, disorienting the mind. In the chaos, he would take what he came for. But we were ready. I didn't fight the darkness. I didn't summon a shield. Instead, I reached for the bond, not just with Alistair, but with the new, fragile, beautiful bonds in the room, the bonds of hope forged over 3 days of talk, the shared desire for a better tomorrow. And I reached for my children. I placed a hand on the bassinet and let my love for them, my fierce, unwavering light flow out, not as a beam, but as a song, a pulse of pure, golden, healing energy that carried a single clear note. This is ours to protect. The reaction was not mine alone.
Alistair's alpha power, clean and strong, rose to meet it, a steadfast drumbeat to my melody. But then, from the crowd, other lights sparked. An Omega delegate, her own small healing gift kindled by my collegium's promise, added her voice. A hardened border alpha, roved by the vision of unity, lent his strength. A human merchant, grateful for the new peace, added his hope. One by one, then in dozens, then in hundreds, the people in the hall pushed back against the chilling dark, not with violence, but with connection, with the shared future they had just spent days building. The shadow mist recoiled, not from power, but from consensus, from a will stronger than one man's control. Silas stood revealed in the center of the hall, his illusion shattered, his face a mask of stunned disbelief. His magic was that of division, of secret leashes and solitary control. It could not stand against the combined, willing light of a united people. He looked at me, at the bassinet, at the hundreds of faces turned against him, their eyes no longer confused, but determined. "You see," I said, my voice amplified by the collective energy in the room, "the equation has rebalanced itself. Your age of shadows is over. This is the age of light, and you have no place in it." He snarled, the sound of pure, impotent rage, and gathered his power for one final, desperate strike, aimed straight at the high table. He never released it. From the crowd, an old woman stepped forward. She was the head of the Omega shelters, her back bent, her hands gnarled. She had spoken softly but powerfully during the moot. In her eyes was the weight of generations of silent suffering. "We are tired of men like you," she said, her voice like rustling leaves, yet it carried. "Tired of secrets, tired of fear." She simply pointed a crooked finger at him. It wasn't magic, it was judgment. And with that gesture, the collective will of the hall solidified. The golden light we had created condensed around Silas, not to burn, but to bind, to neutralize. It wrapped around him, sealing his power, silencing his voice. He struggled, but it was like struggling against the ocean tide. He was not defeated by a king or a queen. He was undone by the people. The guards moved in and took him, not as a mighty sorcerer, but as a frail, defeated old man. He was led away, his head bowed, his shadow finally dissolved in the dawn we had created. The hall erupted, not in chaos, but in a roar of triumph so profound it shook the stone. It was the sound of chains breaking, the sound of a future being born. Later, on the balcony overlooking the city, Alistair held me close. The twins were asleep inside, safe, guarded by a kingdom that had just fought for them. The celebrations below echoed through the night. "You did it," he murmured into my hair. "They didn't just break his magic, you broke his idea." "We did it," I corrected, leaning into his strength. He turned me to face him, his storm-gray eyes clear and full of a love that weathered death, curse, and shadow. He kissed me then, not a kiss of pact or desperation, but a kiss of promise, of a long, bright road stretching out before us. I kissed him back, my healer's heart full to bursting. The hidden Omega was hidden no more. She was a queen, a mother, a healer. She had faced a dying king's proposal and answered it with a lifetime. Below us, the lights of the city twinkled like a field of stars brought to earth. The great moot would continue tomorrow, building the new council, writing the new laws. The work was just beginning. But as I looked at my husband and thought of my sleeping son and daughter, I knew the greatest work was already done. We had survived, we had healed, we had won. And our happy ending was just the beginning.